Hello, Dungeon Masters and home studio audience members. As the title of this video suggests, I'm hopefully going to be able to give you some advice to help you better plan your sessions, or at least some new ways to plan your sessions based around the classic three-act narrative storytelling style. It's kind of a general classic way that things get written. You've probably heard it before. I'm going to show you how it relates to D&D planning and how maybe it can help your game out a little bit. Let's go ahead and get started. You're watching The Dungeon Geek. Big fucking disclaimer right off the bat. Like most D&D tips and tricks videos, this is not, again, the best, only perfect way to do something. There's lots of ways to do everything. This video is just merely a commentary on some ways that I've done things and some things that I've noticed in the past, and you know, how I've used it over the years. And hopefully some of it is useful to you, even if it's you finding out that this is not for you at all. So let's go ahead and get started. Most of you smart, beautiful people already understand that most stories follow a very similar pattern. Act 1, the characters are introduced, there's an exposition, and then they're called to action. Act 2, there's a rising action, which is leading towards the climax. The heroes face some sort of trial or tribulation. And then Act 3, the final resolution and climax to the story. And this is typically everything that you've ever read or seen on TV. So how does this three-act structure truly relate to D&D, and what are some good principles to combine the two together when prepping for your sessions? Let's talk about that now. When I started getting back into DMing a lot, about 6-7 years ago, I was really into Pathfinder Society because it fit my schedule so well. I could dedicate Friday nights and go to a game store and play for 3 to 4 hours with a group of 4 to 7 individuals, and then by the end everything was wrapped up. There were no loose ends. Some people consider this type of storytelling, be it like Adventure League or Society Play, to be a bit railroady, but I kind of ported over the style of how these adventures were broken down whenever I started creating adventures of my own or running homebrew games or home campaigns. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the Society or Adventure League modules was they were built very specifically to fit within a specific amount of time. And there's some science behind that. They play tested the shit out of these things, I'm sure, to make sure that a group of 4 to 6 individuals or whatever it may be can get through this session in the allotted time that the store running this adventure path has set for them to be there. And so that was sort of the aha moment that I had to say, well, I could just easily take the 3-act structure, and that's sort of what they're doing here. It's the players are introduced to a problem, then they go out and they solve it, they run into some issues, and then there's a big climax, and then there's the resolution, and the story's over. So this is not a new principle. This has been done before by people smarter than myself. Everyone's time is finite. We only have so much time to play D&D, and I like to play and get a lot done in a single session. So generally, if some sort of DM tips and tricks principle will allow me to trim fat off of my game, any excess stuff that I can get rid of that is not the core adventuring experience for me and my players, I'm going to use those tips to my full advantage. And so some players, of course, like to play a really long time, 6, 8, 12 hours at a time, but not all of us have those kinds of availabilities. In December of 2016, Mike Shea, a prevalent Dungeons & Dragons writer and blogger, sent out a survey to 6,600 DMs. And overwhelmingly, their responses to his questions were that they and their groups typically play 2 to 4 times a month. And when they do get together, they play for 3 to 4 hours. So that's not a lot of time. Anyone that's played D&D for any amount of time, or Pathfinder for that example, knows that combats can easily slip into a 2-hour window. If you plan ahead of time and you kind of wrangle your encounter beforehand by planning your session, there is a good chance that you're going to be able to build your encounters for the session to fit within that window of time that you have available. You're able to create more concise sessions sessions and get a lot more done because you can understand the timing of things a little bit better. I've sort of broken down things empirically from my experience, and I'll share my timings with you. Yours may be different, but this is just kind of my group. And this is assuming that you as a GM and the players are focused, and when it's their turn, they're ready to act, and they pay attention to the story, and they know what's going on, and you're able to, get combat turns taken care of pretty efficiently. From what I've found, typically, anytime a combat breaks out, I need at least 5 minutes of real time to finish the combat for each one of my players involved. So I've got a 5-man group, so that's 25 minutes right there that needs to be scheduled for an encounter if a combat breaks out with that group. Additionally, I like to schedule at least 5 minutes for every other list item on the initiative order. So regardless of whether I'm doing individual goblins moving or a group of goblins, if it's goblins, orcs, skeletons, that's an additional 15 minutes right there that I need to factor in for the encounter. And so as you can see, the bigger the combat, you're going to eat up a lot of your session time right there. So if you have a big battle planned to fight the boss, but you've got a couple of small combat encounters earlier in the session, make sure that the timing for all of these things fits within your window. So how can you use this information practically? Take some notes. It's the best advice that I can give you to do this. Get a slip of paper, draw 2 lines in the middle about yay apart, and just put a 1, a 2, and a 3. And we know in Act 1, you're going to be figuring out, all right, well, where are the players? What have they been up to? Who are they approached by? And what can I do to get them to take action? Maybe they're going to take action on their own accord, and that's great. But maybe an encounter needs to happen either via role play through an NPC, or perhaps even a combat encounter breaks out, a very minor one, that then sends the players out to act to reach Act 2, and maybe the bar that they're in gets robbed by some goons that are at the behest of the villain that they're pursuing, just for an example. So that would be encounter number 1. And so I'd say factor in 15 minutes to 30 minutes for sort of a role play encounter there at the very beginning. That'll also allow your players to take care of any sort of I guess session recap from the previous time that you guys played together, be it like figuring out how you're going to split loot, or if you need to go and try and sell something, or if there are questions about what happened last session, or if players are just generally late. Then go ahead and factor in, let's say, a small combat as well, so a couple of guards plus your player group. So that's 25 minutes right there for the group, plus an additional 20 minutes for 4 goons inside the barn. And so at this point you're up to the first hour of your session, and so we've got 3 more hours to play with in our 4-hour session. What else can we do with them? Moving on to Act 2, you need to kind of guess where your players are heading. What are their options? How are they traveling? What are their goals? What are the big kind of pressing issues that they're trying to face? And how can you then prepare for that? Generally, I would say prepare 2 options. If they go to A, run A. If they go to B, run B. And if they try and go off course, you can do what I like to do, which is to dissuade them with problems. If they're going to be traveling through a forest and you haven't prepared anything for the forest, maybe make the forest a little more challenging for them and say, like the rain is very thick, or the overgrowth is bad, or bad things have been spotted in the forest, which could backfire because maybe they want to go kill the bad thing in the forest. But you can always try and dissuade. I wouldn't say railroad them full on, but it's kind of a gentle nudge to let them know, I don't really have anything planned to do that, but without breaking the mirage of the reality of the world that you're building around them. But try and get them to hit either plot A or plot B, and then have those encounters break out. Now, this could be meeting someone or visiting a location. It really depends on the game that you're running. But one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that if you're going to have encounters there, maybe have the encounters happen during the last leg of their journey. This is something that I like to do so that the players aren't fully rested when they get to the climax, whatever the climax is. I like to have some of their spells eaten up, or maybe a couple of them having taken a couple of hits, so that the last encounter does have some gravity to it. And Jim Murphy's got a good video on encounters and DMing, and about how he likes to build his dungeons to where there's some redundancy in the encounter. So, you know, the first couple of things run away and grab the next couple of things, and so they're fighting this like wave battle. It's a really good video. I suggest you try and look it up and watch it. He is a master at his craft, but again, the whole principle behind this is don't just hand players their treasure when they fight the boss. It's by no means fair to have a fully healed and rested group go up against your main bad guy during a session. That's no fun for the DM. You want to see these players sweat and earn the treasure it is that you're going to hand out to them, right? Fuck yes. So Act 2, overall, they are tested by their enemies. Perhaps they meet new allies, or they meet new seeds to other types of adventures, and they are preparing to face down evil, or face down something bad at the climax, or they are met with it. Oftentimes in the Act 2, it's a good place to, you know, slam the heroes and be like, oh, you know, we just went through this bad thing, and we might fail. Act 3, typically at the very end of Act 2 or right at the beginning of Act 3 is whenever the final ordeal happens. They face the consequences of their actions. There's the big showdown, and then once the showdown is wound up, there is the resolution. So there's an alternative to this. You don't always have to end with a resolution. In fact, oftentimes every third session or so, when I was running campaigns this way, I would love to leave my players on a cliffhanger, because that's going to make them want to come back and play again. And so what you can do is you can have Act 1 in your next session be the exposition, which is the end of that cliffhanger. The cliffhanger's end is what triggers them and calls them to adventure and calls them into action, which gets them through Act 1 of your next session and on to Act 2 of your next session. Rinse and repeat. Keep the momentum going. Another thing that I should point out is that I am not saying railroad your adventures and plan everything out. What I'm saying is that on a session by session basis, as a DM, you should be able to predict the likely things that your group is going to do. If you can't do this with your group, if you find that they're completely erratic, maybe this isn't the correct process to follow when planning your sessions. But usually, I can figure out at least 5 things that they're likely to do any given session, and usually I overdo it. I usually have enough content when I plan for 1 session to at least run 2 sessions. Overall, I would say that railroad adventures are okay. They're a part of D&D. I've ran them in the past. I will run them in the future. But allow players choices to make the world seem bigger and more alive than what it may actually be. You are the dungeon master. You are the one behind the curtain. Your players do not know everything you have planned. The beauty of that is that you can make it seem like you have a lot more planned than they actually know, which is going to make the game seem bigger than it actually is and bring life to the world that you are creating with your players. So with that, it's very easy to feel like you have options, even if there are only a few. This is really just the basics of the 3-act structure and how to build a session around it. Each encounter being a plot point. So there is the beginning, there's the middle, there's the end. There's 3 right there. Go ahead and add a couple more depending on the amount of time that you estimate you have available. Keep a couple on the back burner just in case the party goes in a different unexpected direction. But be prepared with the amount of time that you have allotted for your group so no one's time is wasted at your game. This whole method is really a way to view GMing and session building as more of an episodic sort of style of gameplay. It doesn't have to be a completely linear adventure. Act 1 and Act 2 can have a huge time jump in between them. You can cut out travel entirely, like Matt Colville has suggested. Or you can have Act 2 be the travel experience. And, you know, maybe the adventurers are rolling for random encounters and rolling for survival, but the real big encounter that happens is kind of something you've already planned. maybe they are going to run into that pack of ravaging gnolls, and you just sort of make it look like it happened randomly. The players will not be any the wiser that you've prepared this thing for them, and they'll think it is part of the flow of the adventure and the randomness of the gameplay, making your world that you're building for them and yourself this wild, vibrant, living place that they love adventuring in. All in all, have fun with the encounter building process. Make sure that these things are lean and that they're important and that they have gravity to them. Make sure that there are consequences to their success and their failure as they're adventuring. Hopefully these tips helped you in some way. Feel free to discuss it in the comments section below. Share this video if you liked this content or want to make a rebuttal to any of it. Thank you so much for watching today. Do the things with the things. If you like things on YouTube, you know what to do. Also visit my WordPress. That's where I've got all of the free D&D content that I've created so far in 2018. More to come. Thank you so much for stopping by. This has been the Dungeon Geek.